Hello. By the way, if it looks like I'm getting older from the previous time that you saw me, that's because I am. I have a granddaughter and a grandson. Uh, my granddaughter's 2, and my grandson's 4. He'll be 5 in December. Anyway, they look different every time I see them because they're growing so fast. Why would I be changing that much? I'm getting weird comments from people, but I welcome them and I relish them. And I always think and believe that other people can always be a good influence on me. And so I like to engage, talk to total strangers, see a woman in the supermarket and joke around with her about how much food she's buying, or, trouble making up her mind. And I can usually get a smile and a laugh from a lady or two in the supermarket. And that's my goal every day, is to get a woman to smile and laugh. And I consider that day a success. And there's a reason behind that. I'll talk about that later. But I just got back from the supermarket and I was successful. I did get a couple of ladies. One lady that had 2 little girls with her and a shopping cart that was completely and totally full. And I said something. I dropped a little tin of yogurt and it landed perfectly upright on the floor. And I said, I told her, look at that. What was the chance of that happening? And she started laughing and smiling, and her 2 little girls covered up their mouths and started giggling. To me, that makes it a good day. Anyway, I'm getting requests to talk about some of the artwork that was behind me on one of my videos, and there it is. And I'm a collector of aviation. I'll move my head over because that is a painting by John Shaw called The Hornet's Nest, and it's a rendition of the Doolittle raid just before they launched from the Hornet on April 18th, 1942. And it's exquisite. I'm sorry, that one there is not the Hornet's Nest. That's Black Sheep Squadron. That's the Black Sheep Squadron that the famous TV show Baa Baa Black Sheep. And the more I looked into that arrangement, the more amazing it was. And I'll do a more in-depth detail thing. The Hornet's Nest is over there. It's whited out by. I'll give you better views of this stuff some other time. But for now, I wanted to talk one more time about the Piper Light Sport accident in, I want to say Mesa Verde. That's wrong. It's not Palo. Shit. Now I'm. Anyway, it's right next to LAX. Damn it, I forgot. See what the pressure of entertainment can do to you, of show business. Gotta watch out for that. So some people say I should take some notes and not have as many interruptions in my presentation. With me, it doesn't always work because if I'm referring to my notes, my brain stops. But my brain stops anyways. So I want to talk. Alameda. I can't remember the name of the airport. I'll remember it as soon as I sign off. But I wanted to talk about the danger in any aircraft type, and I would say probably any spacecraft too, of jamming the throttle in suddenly, forcefully, and completely to the metal. Pedal to the metal, that kind of thing. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. In these engines, they're not like car engines. They don't have a transmission. Except for this Piper Sport, you could say that the gearing reduction arrangement between the prop and the crankshaft could be considered a form of transmission, but it doesn't change gears. It's still just one gear, constant gear. But as I said in a previous video, that gear in that airplane is just like the low gear that you have on a bicycle. So on a bicycle, as you pedal in low gear, you can turn the pedals 2 or 3 times before the wheel that you're driving turns once, right? So you pedal 1, 2, 3, 4 even, and the back wheel turns once. So the ratio, let's just say it's 4 pedals to get 1 turn on the back wheel. That's a 4 to 1 or 1. That's actually, yeah, it's 4 to 1, 4 to 1 gear ratio. I want to reference the prototype Boeing 747 when it was announced in 1969 and first flight. They were coming up to the announcement day. There were going to be public dignitaries. The press was going to be there. They had numerous orders from different airlines. All the airlines' logos are going to be on the airplane. However, leading up to that eventful and fateful day of first flight, in front of a whole lot of people too, they had a serious problem with their engines. They were exploding. Hey, here's our new airplane. I have to laugh. I'm sorry. If I don't laugh, I don't see any given day worthwhile unless you can get a few laughs out of it, because life is pretty darn funny. That's kind of a funny situation, but it's very high pressure, very stressful for Boeing, and especially for Pratt & Whitney, who supplied those first set of engines for the first 747. So the pilots would start up the engines, they'd push the throttle forward, and an engine would explode. And they do it on a second engine, the second engine would explode. But Pratt & Whitney swore up and down. They said, these engines they didn't explode for us. Like, did you do something to them? And Boeing says, no. And then finally, they brought the hammer down on Pratt & Whitney, and either the vice president or the president of the company went to Seattle to take a test flight on the prototype. So I think they got it up in the air. And I'm not sure. They could have been on the ground. I'm not sure. I think they were up in the air, though. And the pilot, and maybe it was at half throttle, the pilot took one engine and pushed the throttle all the way forward, and it exploded while they were flying. That doesn't seem very schmott, to quote Don Adams and Maxwell Smart. Not very schmott. Do it on the ground. They did it in the air to drive the point home to the P&W official. And the guy, the P&W guy, was just like shaking his head. And the test pilot says, okay, I'll do it on a second engine just to make sure that you're convinced. And the P&W guy said, no, I believe it. So they got it back on the ground, and they had one engine that exploded, and a lot of brainstorming and everything else. And guess what they found out? I'm thinking that a lot of experienced pilots, I hope, that are listening to this already know the answer. Because I learned the answer at flying a 152. It's the same problem that 747 had. You applied fuel too hard and too fast. You cannot do pedal to the metal. In airplanes, it creates much more of a hazard than any kind of benefit that you'll get out of it, right? Especially in a panic situation. So Pratt & Whitney introduced a fix, I guess you could say. They put some, with engine power like that, I think each engine was like 60,000 pounds of thrust. That's 240,000 pounds of thrust total between the four engines. When you throw a whole bunch of kerosene into the combustion chamber, just like whack, all at once, the engine will explode. So P&W came up with a fix that prevented the pilot from just going bam and throwing the throttle forward. Instead, they can push that throttle, and it's only going to give a little bit. And so what do you lose? Like maybe 20 feet of runway in exchange for engines running at peak performance? That's a good trade-off. Then later models, all jets have this, all airline jets have this feature now. And we're talking about Airbus and Boeing, Embraer, Dassault, I don't know if the small private jets have this, but I know the big ones do. And that is, the airplane senses the atmospheric conditions as you start the engines up, and as you're taxiing out to the runway, the airplane is getting the humidity, the density, altitude, the heat, the density, altitude. The most important thing is the ambient heat, which can raise the density, altitude significantly. But the airplane is figuring all that out. Center of gravity, everything else, the airplane computer does that. So when he gets on the numbers and he's cleared he or she is cleared for takeoff, all they do is touch that throttle, and software automatically adjusts it to the correct setting. Now, if you have a situation where you got to get off, if it's a short field takeoff, I don't know about that with a big jet, but just for example, if you have to abort, if you have to, abort the takeoff, whatever, you can manually take over, but you're never going to be able just to jam those throttles forward. Now, general aviation, the airplanes that I flew in didn't have that. They don't have that feature, and I found out the hard way from an instructor. I was in primary training. I hadn't soloed yet. Got to the numbers 152, did the run up and everything else. Taxied out to the numbers, announced departure over the Unicom, and then I just nobody ever brought it to my attention. I just put the heel of my hand on the throttle and just pushed it in. And the instructor said, "What the hell are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going to takeoff power. What do you think I'm doing?" He goes, "Don't ever do that. Don't ever throw all the power in on one gigantic thrust." There's a sexual connotation there, I think. I apologize to those sensitive souls out there, but you get the idea. Because it throws gasoline just right down into those chambers, and these are high performance engines, high octane. I mean, aviation fuel, 100 octane and up, 110, 100, 110 we were burning, and you could smell the lead when you first started up the engine. But it's the same principle. And nothing happened that day. Thank God, Cessnas are so forgiving. And then another time, I twisted. I was really tight about something. I forget what it was. Probably power stalls. And I was on the way back, cruising on the way back, and I adjusted the throttle, but I locked. There's like a tightening lock around the axis of the throttle rod that comes out, and you can tighten that so you can't add power and you can't take power away. And so when the instructor went to adjust the power, he tried pushing and pulling. He says, "What'd you do?" I said, "I don't know. What did I do?" A million things going through my head. He says, "You made it so I can't adjust the power." He said, "Don't do that either. I mean, you got to be a little bit better on your game to know how important your power settings are and how they might have to change." I said, "Yeah, but you told me not to apply too much when we were back on the ground." He goes, "Yeah, that goes for any time. You don't ever want to just jam the throttle wide open instantly, because the planes can react in a way where you lose control." All right, so Juan Brown, Blanco Lirio, another shout out to Juan. An amazing career, amazing. I mean, it's been fun watching him, and he went through a loss of his pilot's license when he had his prostate taken out, and he told everybody about that, and he got it taken out successfully, and his PSA went to 0. I wish I could say that. Anyway, so on the Piper accident, he made the case that the gear reduction of the prop turning slower than the crankshaft, I guess it makes sense. But is it possible just to jam the throttle in on that thing and just completely add full power in a wink of an eye? I'm going to say yeah, it probably is. I don't know for sure. And if that's what happened, that could easily explain the end result of both people dying in a low altitude spin on final approach. It blows my mind every time I think about it. And when you're 100 feet over the ground and you turn the airplane on its side with a full acceleration and a full application of power, you don't have enough room to recover. And they didn't, and they paid the ultimate price for that, sadly. That being said, I don't remember ever reading anything about this anywhere, in any flight manual, in any owner's manual, any instruction manual, anywhere. The only way I found out about it was an instructor yelling at me, saying, "Don't ever apply power like that, and don't lock up the throttle the way you did either. You got to be on your game. You can't be thinking about your girlfriend or the ice hockey game you played last night or anything like that, or any of the teams that you're following. You can't daydream when you're flying, and you have to totally respect the hazards that you can create. and that are going to be there whether you create them or not. And this is like a thing that you should be thinking about all the time. In my view, I don't know what happened in that Piper, but in a speculative way, you could say, somebody applied power. The extra torque that came through to the propeller, which it doesn't turn faster, but there's a ton more torque in the propeller after you add all that power, could have pulled the airplane over on its back to the left, and at that point it's too late. That's where you could hear the instructor yelling at the student. The student kind of grunted and groaned. He didn't know what was going on. He didn't know what he had done. But this is one of those things that you don't hear, you only know about it if you hear about it. It should be mandatory and part of your training regimen to be careful with that throttle. Pratt and Whitney discovered it and found out that, hey, you take a bucket of fuel and you just throw it into the combustion chamber of a 60,000 pound thrust engine, and it's wide open instantly. It's going to cause an explosion. And so, hey, lo and behold, the pilots right then and there, just so that they could have a successful inauguration day for this incredible airplane, they got the message through to the test pilots: when you apply the power, do it slowly. And if you fly in an airline, you get to the threshold of the runway, you get on the runway, you're cleared for takeoff. If you listen to the engines, they spool up a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then all the way. So the pilot is either it's an automatic throttle setting. Either the computer is doing that, or the pilot could be doing that, just applying the power slowly, easily, smoothly into the full throttle position. There's no problem. There's no problem. But I'd love for somebody to tell me that they're aware of this, number one. Number two, how they became aware of it. Because this needs to be disseminated and distributed throughout the aviation community, and it's not. It's definitely not. And it's likely, I would say, that was a contributing factor to the incredibly tragic accident. And the more I'm looking into general aviation accidents, the more I'm finding out that there's a lot of them, man, more than I thought. And the FAA, what can I say? What does FAA stand for? Fully aware of anything? Yeah, you guys can come up with something better. Flying absolutely... Okay, never mind. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. I can't help it. Any feedback would be appreciated on this point of view. And if you can help me with your experiences, if you have any, regarding that issue, I would be in your debt. And would appreciate it very much. I hope you guys are doing well. The Eagles won yesterday, so I'm okay. More than that, I'm a Miami Dolphins fan, and what happened between them and Buffalo, I have never seen in my whole life yesterday. I've never seen one team achieve 500 yards of offense, and the other team gets 200 yards of offense, but the 500-yard team lost. How is that possible? What was the other thing? Oh, yeah. Miami got a safety at the end of the game. It turned out to work in their favor, too. How is that possible? You give the other team 2 points and the ball, and it works out good for you. There's a voodoo spell in Miami that every visiting team that goes in down there is cursed by some kind of voodoo doctor or witch doctor. I'm convinced, because that's the only explanation that makes any sense that I can come up with. Anyway, sorry to go on about football, but it is football season, and I am into it. So any feedback about that throttle issue would be tremendously appreciated. And the pictures in back of me, I'll do I promise a quick thing on that in the near future. God bless you, and take care of yourselves. And fly safe. Happy landings.